start the recording. All right, so thank you everyone for spending your afternoon with us. I hope you'll get a lot of valuable information out of the presentation. So I'm going to briefly introduce our wonderful guest who's going to lead you all through some of this important information about U.S. immigration statuses and employment. So Kristen Knudsen Esquire is a partner at Smith Knudsen LLC and represents businesses and individuals in their immigration matters. She's been helping students and entrepreneurs plan their next steps in their immigration journeys for many years. Kristen started her career in immigration law at Safe House Denver, coordinating its immigration program to help immigrant victims of domestic violence. She represented asylum seekers fleeing torture and persecution in their home countries. Kristen then gained valuable experience in federal litigation before returning to the field of immigration and nationality law. She founded her own practice focusing on immigration in 2013. She's been co-chair of the USCIS Liaison Committee of the American Immigration Law Association, Lawyers Association, Colorado chapter since 2021. She's also a past chair of AILA Colorado chapter and has been involved in various AILA and Colorado Bar Association committees since 2011. So I'll hand it over to Kristen to start the presentation.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks to CU for having me. It's a really exciting time if you're thinking about graduating or thinking about the next steps in your journey in the United States. It's a good time to think about your goals, whether you want to stay in the United States here temporarily, or you're hoping to remain here permanently. My presentation is going to focus a lot on the normal steps that students take to become permanent residents of the United States or to gain temporary status. But if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And I just ask that those questions not be case specific, meaning I don't want your personal information in there to protect you and the confidentiality of your case. I can answer general questions or hypothetical questions, so make sure that they're those types of questions. So we're going to talk for a little while about the most common path after graduation, which is optional practical training, STEM OPT, and then H-1B, specialty occupation status, and then employment-based green card. We'll definitely go through that pathway, but there are a lot of limitations for H-1Bs nowadays. They're a little bit under attack during this administration. And so it's important to think about other options as well and have a backup plan. You want to think creatively and flexibly. If you're unable to pursue an H-1B, then maybe you want to have one or two other ideas. Going back to school, maybe you already have a permanent residency option available to you. So we're going to go through some of those backup plans as well. So some of the other options that we're going to run through quickly today: temporary worker self-petitions. So you may be able to sponsor yourself if you're an entrepreneur, or you have some money to invest in the United States. There's other temporary options depending on your level of expertise, and or where you're from and your profession. You might be able to sponsor yourself if you're already accomplished in your field, for permanent residency as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit. There are also other humanitarian options, and family-based options. So we won't be able to go into detail on everything today, but I definitely want to touch upon these ideas so that you don't feel like, wow, if I don't get an H-1B, there's nothing else for me. And I want to take a brief moment to talk about how good advice in the area of immigration is so incredibly important. And there are a few places that you want to look for good advice. Understand what the university offers. CU has an awesome international student department with lots of materials available to you so you can read about some of the options that are available, particularly on things like CPT, OPT, STEM, OPT. And so definitely understand what they offer and then also what they don't offer. So they may not give you specific legal advice if you've been charged with a crime. They may not give you specific legal advice if you want to pursue an O visa. And so those are times when you need to know that it's time to branch out and seek legal advice elsewhere. Make sure that the advice that you're getting is specific to your circumstances and is for you. Don't use the advice that your friend was given. I really do suggest speaking with an immigration lawyer when you're branching out, in particular beyond this OPT, STEM OPT options. And you don't want to talk to a notario. Notarios are individuals who tend to pretend to be attorneys. They may be attorneys in another country, but aren't licensed in the United States. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people get in trouble by taking the advice of a notario or using a notario to file a form, and then finding out that they've made a mistake that maybe we can't even fix it. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Sometimes they're not even cheaper, so than a real attorney. So just make sure you're talking to an actual immigration lawyer. You want to watch for whose attorney are you speaking to? So sometimes you may be in a meeting with an attorney and it's your employer's attorney. Make sure you understand if it's your attorney as well. There are different types of representation. Sometimes I represent both the employer and the employee. So I'm going to make sure they both know everything that is going on and is relevant in the case. And there are times when I only represent the employer or the employee. So if you're not sure if the attorney you're speaking with represents you, you should ask. Ask if this is a dual representation. Do you represent me? And if you don't, then maybe I need to seek my own advice, depending on the circumstances. And as I mentioned, don't rely on friends' situations. Just as an example, if you were on a J1 and you have a 2-year foreign residency requirement, meaning you have to go back to your country for 2 years before you're allowed to pursue certain options in the US, maybe you were able to get a student visa after that without waiting the 2 years, but you won't be able to change status to an H-1B. So you might be a student and you may be restricted from pursuing an H-1B where your other friend who's a student can pursue an H-1B right now. So you need to make sure that you're getting specific advice for yourself. That's just an example, but there are many other examples of places where you need specific advice. Okay, so like I mentioned, definitely take advantage of optional practical training, STEM optional practical training. OPT is 1 year after you graduate from any degree. You're usually eligible for optional practical training, allowing you to work for yourself or for an employer in your field. STEM OPT can extend that for another 2 years if your degree was in science, technology, engineering, and math. That's something to ask the school about, whether you have a STEM degree or not. This is a great way to explore employment opportunities in your field and to also show your value to potential employers that may then be willing to sponsor you further down the road. All right, I'm not going to go deeply into those because your school has lots of resources, but you can consult with an attorney if you have more questions about that beyond what the school is able to offer. All right, so H-1B is one of the main pathways that students use to gain temporary lawful status in the United States to work for an employer. All right, so these are always employer sponsored. You can't petition for yourself for an H-1B. These are professional positions. They're tied to a degree. So if you have a degree in engineering, then you can get an H-1B to work in an engineering occupation, an engineering position for a particular company. This H-1Bs provide 3 years of temporary status if they're approved, and you can extend to 6 years and beyond that in certain situations. Okay, so it's nice way to kind of bridge between the school and permanent residency down the road. The other nice thing about H-1Bs is that they're dual intent. And this means that you are allowed to be planning to spend your life in the United States when you're on an H-1B. As a student, one of the requirements is that you show that you still have ties to your home country. This is called non-immigrant intent. Each time you enter the country as a student, you have to show that you're planning to leave, that this is temporary, whether it be for a year, 2 years, 5 years. It's while you're in school and then you're going to leave. As an H-1B, you don't have to prove that anymore, which really makes it easier to pursue permanent residency. So what H-1B specialty occupations, there is a cap on the number of H-1Bs in a given year, unless you are not subject to the cap. Okay, so there are 65,000 H-1B visas in the regular cap, and 20,000 H-1Bs for masters, individuals that have master's degrees. Okay, so there's a better chance of getting an H-1B if you have a US master's degree. There aren't enough visas available, and so each year a lottery has been conducted for the past many years. This year they've made some changes to the way that is going, and also made it weighted based on the wage that you're going to be paid, the wage level, and the classification. So depending on the type of position and where you're going to work, they'll look at the wage that's being offered to you and say that's a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 wage. Level 4 wages are for very experienced individuals. They're high wages. Level 1 wages are entry-level wages. And you'll have a better shot of getting selected in this lottery if you have a level 4 wage. Essentially, you'll get 4 shots, 4 entries into the lottery, where someone with a level 1 wage gets 1 entry in the lottery. Okay. Now, who's subject to the cap? Basically, private employers, many nonprofits, and government positions are cap subject positions. Okay, so most positions, I guess I would say, are cap subject. Cap exempt positions are positions at universities, related nonprofits, so nonprofits that have agreements with universities or work with universities, nonprofit research organizations, and government research organizations. Okay, so there's a very limited number of H-1Bs, and getting in the lottery is really important. We're currently in the middle of the registration process for the lottery. This year it runs from March 4th through March 19th. So you can still get in. It's not you that needs to enter in the lottery, it's your potential employer that needs to enter the lottery for you. But we are right in that now. If you miss the registration process, then a cap subject H-1B in the next year is not going to be in the cards for you. All right, so as I mentioned, it's happening right now, the registration. Now, if you want to avoid having to register right now, maybe you're not ready, you haven't graduated yet, you don't have a sponsor, there are ways to avoid the cap. One of those is seeking a cap exempt employer, okay? So if you can get a job at a nonprofit that has agreements with a university, for example, then you can apply, the company can apply for you at any point during the year. There's not a limit on the number of those visas. You don't have to go through the lottery process. If you work part-time for a cap exempt entity and part-time for a cap subject entity, then they're both cap exempt. So you can avoid the cap that way. And there's even a company out there that helps find placements at cap exempt institutions for individuals who are working for private employers as well. So that can be coordinated, but it doesn't always work. It is a way around the cap if that's what you need. Improve your chances. Apply. You want to get into the lottery for the H-1B if you're not at a cap exempt institution or employer. You want to apply as many times as possible. So maybe this is your first year with OPT and you are going to be eligible for STEM OPT. So you've got 3 years that you could work for an employer. Ask them to register you for the lottery every year. If you don't get selected the first year, maybe you can get selected the next year. And I've definitely seen that work well. So if you can get in to register 1, 2, or 3 times, then you want to do that. Okay. And possibly even more. I know somebody registering for the 4th time right now, hoping to get in this year. This year, you'll have a better shot if you have a higher wage, and that is going to be dependent on the classification of the job that's selected, what type of job, and the wage that's actually offered to you. I would say it's difficult to control that too much. Maybe you have a choice between 2 employers, right? But it's going to be difficult to set your own wage or set your own job classification. But just know that it will matter what type of position you're going to be filling for the employer and the wage level that you're being entered at. So if you're working with an employer, you can definitely ask, what position, what type of position, and what wage level is this going to be for the lottery this year. You can improve, let's see, in terms of uncertainty, I think it's really important to have a backup plan. So this is your last year with optional practical training. You want to have a backup plan if you want to remain in the United States. Okay, are you going to go back to school? Maybe you have a bachelor's degree, but you could pursue a master's degree, or a master's and you want to pursue a PhD. So be prepared to pivot to another option. Maybe you're ready to start your own business. You've been thinking about it. You can make plans to start your own business potentially if you are eligible for something like an e-visa. So this is where having a brainstorming session with an attorney might be a really good idea, to see what other options may be available and make plans. Do you have family-based options? Have you been dating a US citizen for 5 years and you've been talking about getting married? Maybe that's something that you want to pursue. And we can talk a little bit about that. All right. In terms of cap gap protection, one of the other considerations when you're planning your education and your graduation is your optional practical training set up so that it expires after April 1st? So April 30th, May 15th, or is it going to expire before April 1st? If it expires after April 1st and you get selected in the H-1B lottery, your work authorization will be automatically extended until October 1st or until whenever you get a decision on that H-1B petition. If it's before April 1st, then you don't get an extension, and you may have like a significant period of time between when you run out of work authorization and when you're authorized to start at your H-1B position. Okay? Because H-1Bs, if it's cap subject, you get selected in the lottery, the earliest you can start working in that position is October 1st. All right, so other considerations. We talked a little bit about position title and description of your job, but that H-1B position has to require a minimum of a bachelor's degree, and the government has to agree with you on that. So it's really important to look at the classification that's going to be used, and just make sure that it's a strong strong position. Okay. So this is something where you can ask your employer or HR, okay, what's the position I'm being entered in? Does my degree match that position? Well, does it fit well? And is this a classification that's likely to be approved if I get selected in the lottery? Work site location. If your company is hiring you to go work for another company, you may have a less of a chance of getting approved as an H-1B. H-1Bs are really supposed to be an employer who wants to employ you directly and not just contract you out. So you want to look for a real employment relationship where your employer, that's the H-1B sponsor, is going to be supervising you, providing you with what you need. Maybe you're working on site. If you're working off site, you've got someone from the company that's closely supervising your work so that that H-1B is likely to be approved. Okay. You want to look at the stability of the company. It doesn't really matter if you get selected in the lottery if that company is then not going to be willing to pay to file your H-1B, or if it goes out of business in a year, you could really be left high and dry without a lot of options. So look at the company that you're working with. The wage that's, oh, sorry about that. The wage that's offered, like I said, higher level wage now will give you a better shot at getting an H-1B, getting into the lottery and getting selected. When you're talking to companies, do they get back to you? You know, does the HR rep get back to you? Are they responsive? Do they know about H-1Bs? Have they filed H-1Bs before? Do they know what they're getting into? Are they actually willing to do what needs to be done to work with a lawyer, to have someone in-house that can help you? You have to assess whether this employer is really serious about you and doing what needs to be done to keep you in the United States. Another consideration, there's a new $100,000 fee for H-1Bs that are new, but we've found, this is from the Trump administration, we found that this is really only if you are outside the United States, or potentially if you're not eligible to change your status to H-1B from within the US. So if you are a student, a J-1 with no 2-year foreign residency requirement, or a student, F-1 student, you've maintained your status, you haven't been working places you're not supposed to be working, haven't violated your student status or your J-1 status in any other way, and you are inside the United States when you apply for that H-1B, then you should be eligible to change status and that $100,000 fee won't apply. If you're sitting at home in China or India, or anywhere else, and you have an employer wanting to sponsor your H-1B, you're not going to be able to do that without the employer paying $100,000. So it's really a big deal to maintain your status in the US and to know whether this visa fee is going to apply to you. All right, so your role in the H-1B process, you want to understand your status and the implications of it, right? You're going to have to provide some documentation of the fact that you have maintained your status in the United States. You're going to have to provide some biographical information. You might have more contact with the attorney if it's a dual representation, the attorney that's preparing the case. You might decide that you want to premium process your case so you get a decision back within 15 days. You can't pay the other fees for the case, but you can pay for premium processing if you want. You might be required to post notice at home. If you're going to be doing remote work, it seems silly, but you want to do it to comply with the rules of the H-1B process. And if you have dependents, spouse, or children, then you want to make sure that if their status is dependent on you, like they're an F2 or a J2, and you want to include them in the in the next process so that they can change their status as well, you want to try to do that at the same time. So let the attorney know, and you either secure another attorney to prepare the documents or work with the attorney that's representing the company to get that filed as well. The thing that you can't do, you don't get to decide the final job description or the title. You don't get to decide the wage for your position. Obviously, you have to agree on that with the employer. You can't sign the petition for the company. You can't self-petition, so you can't sign on behalf of the company. And you can't pay for the H-1B filing fees or any of the attorney fees, except for premium processing, as I mentioned. Okay, so if they're asking you to pay for it or to pay them back for the process, it's not legal and you shouldn't be working with that employer. Or maybe they just need to have it explained to them that you can't pay for it. They have to be willing to do it. But I think it's an important conversation to have up front. All right, if it's approved, you want to keep a copy of the labor condition application. That's part of the process. You'll keep the I-94 that will be sent in the mail. That's your permit, or it's your proof of lawful status in the United States. You got to track your renewal dates. Make sure you know when your H-1B expires and when to start on that extension, because your employer may or may not keep good track of all of this. If you are going to travel outside the US, in order to return, you need an H-1B visa. So you need to make sure that that's something that you can get before you leave the country. And if you change jobs, then you're going to have a new H-1B petition filed for you. Once you've been selected in the lottery, it's easy to change employers with the new employer filing a petition, and it doesn't have to be part of the lottery this time. Other possible outcomes when you file an H-1B petition, and this is the employer filing it for you, you could get a request for additional evidence. You could get a denial of your case. You could also have them say, okay, we're going to approve the petition, but you're going to have to file at the US consulate. And like I mentioned, if you're not eligible to change status, it's possible that that $100,000 fee could apply to you. All right. So the goal here, permanent legal status. When we're talking about employment-based immigrant petitions, all right? Some employers are willing to go straight to this process, especially because the H-1B process is a lottery. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like. I would say more often employers want to work with you for a few years before they're willing to sponsor this process. There are some ways to self-petition for your permanent residency through employment as well. So we'll talk about that briefly. There's a few different classifications of employment-based cases. So we've got EB1 is the first preference. It's employment-based, extraordinary ability, outstanding researcher, professor, multinational manager. These tend to be individuals with more experience and in some cases, awards in the field, lots of publications, lots of citations if you're a researcher. This tends to be for someone with a lot of experience, but I have gotten EB1 type cases approved for individuals who are just out of post-grad as well, if they've had significant accomplishments and lots of citations already. EB2 is extraordinary ability or exceptional ability, so it's a slightly lower level of accomplishment that you would have to prove to get into this classification. And there is a possibility, or you have a master's degree, okay? And EB2 also includes a national interest waiver, so that could be self-sponsored. EB3 are most professional workers and skilled workers, individuals with bachelor's degrees, and the positions require a bachelor's degree. All right, and why does the classification matter? Because there are different numbers of these various types of visas available in a given year. So I'm showing you now the visa bulletin. This is released every month, and it tells us how many visa or when you would have had to file your petition. This is called your priority date in order to have a visa for permanent residency available to you in this particular month. Okay. It's broken down somewhat by country, and that's because certain countries have a large demand. It's really broken out by every country, but a lot of countries kind of fit into this all chargeability areas. So you have to figure out which classification am I in and which country was I born in. Um, and from there, you can decide whether there are visas available for you. And if not, how long are you going to be waiting? Now, I want to show you quickly that like how to read this. So if you look, for example, at this employment-based, second preference, all chargeability areas. So maybe you're from Panama. Um, it says 15 Oct 24. That means that if you had a petition filed for you by an employer, for example, on or before the 15th of October of 2024, then you have a visa available to you in March of 2026 for an immigrant visa. So you could apply for your permanent residence. Okay. If it says C, then it's current. So first employment preference, those more experienced positions or extraordinary ability positions, they're current, meaning there are visas available this month for everyone, no matter whether you filed that petition yet or not. So this is something you may have to track. If you're from India or China, you can see that these dates are significantly retrogressed, is what we would say. They're behind. So you can wait a very long time if you're from India or China for an employment-based petition to come current. Okay? All right, so most employees go through a perm process with their employer, where the employer asks the government, how much do I have to pay this person for this job description? It's called the prevailing wage request. Go through recruitment, where they try to fill the position with a US worker. It's like a labor market test to see if they can fill the position. They don't have to hire, but if they find someone who's qualified, then that would be it for the process for the next 6 months. If they don't find anyone, they can file to have that position certified as open and available. So that's the perm labor certification application. Once that's approved, they have to file a petition for you to fill that position, for the worker to fill that position. That's the Form I-130 or I-140. And the application for residency comes whenever there's a visa available, okay? And you need an approved I-140 petition. So it's really important, a few things to note for you as the potential employee here. This takes a very long time, okay? This can take anywhere from 2 years would be extremely fast. I would say maybe not possible right now, up to 4+ years to complete this process. It's going to depend on where you're from and your classification and how responsive the employer is. So this is a long process. It's not a way to remain in the US if if your status expires next month. Okay. So lots of planning involved. You got to select, your employer has to be really careful about how they lay out the position, and you need to have proof that you qualify for that position before you get too far in this process. So they may ask you for employment verification letters that state the specific requirements, that you've met those requirements before you even get to that prevailing wage determination request. Okay. You want them to do that so that you don't get to the last step in the process and find out that you're going to have your I-140 petition denied. The recruitment has to be done by the employer, and that's not something you should be involved in. And you don't want to be involved in recruiting for a worker to fill that position, or it would be invalid. All right. So your role, get everything that they ask you for, provide the documentation, check in with HR or your employer, supervisor to see what's going on. Make sure your spouse and children are included in the I-140 petition. You might be asked to pay for your residency. You're going to have to get a medical exam for that when you get to that final step. And you might have to attend a USCIS interview. Okay. It's not your role to participate in recruitment. You shouldn't be signing any forms. You can't self-petition on these perm cases. And you shouldn't be paying for this process either, except for that last step when you apply for permanent residency. All right, now these are the type of self-petitions. So if you don't have an employer that's willing to sponsor you, or you have an employer and you're not very comfortable with that employer, you think that you may want to work for someone else, you could sponsor yourself if you qualify for a national interest waiver or for an extraordinary ability petition. There's also, if you do have significant resources, you could apply for an EB-5. That's permanent residency by investing in the United States and creating jobs. So those are very specific situations, and you should talk to an attorney about your credentials and qualifications. You are going to need to gather not just your resume, but proof of any awards you've ever won, articles written about you, any sort of proof of credentials. There are lists online of the classifications of evidence, but you may want to kind of gather that evidence together to go talk to an attorney so you can really assess your eligibility for these different classifications. All right, there's also when we're talking about other options, kind of out of this normal, OPT, STEM OPT, H-1B, and then employment-based permanent residency options. Here's some other ideas. If the H-1B doesn't work out for you, you can look at other options. So TNs are based on NAFTA and treaties between the US and Canada. There's a list of occupations, types of jobs that are eligible for a TN. And it's a streamlined process that allows you to work in the United States. And most of those are sponsored by employers. Some of them are sponsored. If you're a management consultant, that's kind of a catch-all in some ways, but you're supposed to be working with management, advising management. If you do that you could potentially file as a self-petition. But there's a list of jobs, and if you fit into the job with the right degree from the US, Mexico, or Canada, you may be able to do a TN. Okay. H-1B ones are like H-1Bs for Singapore and Chile only. And there's a certain number of visas allocated just to Singapore and Chile. They're slightly different process. But if you're from Singapore or Chile, you're lucky because a lot of times there are visas available for those types of visas year round. E3 is a specialty occupation just for Australia. It's also similar to the H-1B, but it's a process just for Australians, and there's no limit on E3s. E1, treaty trader, E2, treaty investors. Those are treaty-based. So the US has treaties with various countries around the world for people to basically be entrepreneurs in the United States, right? So you may be able to get an e-visa if you're from the UK, you want to start a company in the US, you have money to invest. Or there are employee visas available for companies that qualify for these E1, E2 treaty options. Okay, if there's no treaty with your country, then you're not going to be able to pursue this. The great thing about this is that it's not $1 million investment. It's going to depend on what type of company you're trying to open or what kind of company you're running, how much that investment's going to be. I've done them as low as $25,000. Not saying that that always works, but it doesn't have to, it's not $1 million, right? In a lot of circumstances. Other temporary options, maybe you return to school. Okay, if I don't get an H-1B, or if I'm waiting on my employment-based green card to go through, maybe I go back and get another degree. Maybe I qualify as an O1. It's possible that you've gone to school in one area, but maybe you're, a professional athlete who has won a gold medal in the Olympics, maybe you have extraordinary ability in your field already. Maybe you've won a major award. So this is, O1s are looking for national or international recognition in your field. And the field can be many, many different types of things. All right. So if you're accomplished and that's been acknowledged in your home country or internationally, you might be eligible for an O1. You are supposed to be doing that thing in the United States as well. Okay. P1 athletes and entertainers. These are professional athletes. Again, international reputation recognition. Entertainers in musical groups that are coming to perform in the United States. These might apply to you. Maybe not exactly what you're doing in school, but maybe there are options for you there. If you look at options with multinational companies, there are ways to transfer from abroad to the United States after a year of working. So if you can find a company that has a branch or a parent and subsidiary outside the US and inside the US, you could leave the US, go work for the company for a year. You have to work in a managerial, executive, or specialized knowledge position for at least a year, and then you could get transferred back to the United States. So this is a great option if it applies. And it's easier than H-1B many times because there aren't a limit on the number of these visas available. There's also humanitarian options. I would say that some of these options are under attack in the current administration. So asylum, the government is accepting applications for asylum, but they're not processing them. And it looks like they're trying to remove eligibility for work authorization with asylum applications. So, I think talking to a lawyer, if this is something that you're considering, really, really super important. It's really important what goes on that asylum application for your future and your chances at getting approved. It's still an option to apply for asylum if you're afraid of returning to your home country for a specific reason. But it's definitely more difficult than it used to be. U visas, if you've been a victim of crime in the United States, you have to see whether it qualifies, whether it's a qualifying crime. They tend to be more serious crimes that qualify. But you assist in the prosecution or the investigation of the crime, even if you've just called the police, you might be eligible for a U visa. There's something to talk to an attorney about. T visas for victims of human trafficking. I'm actually surprised at how broad this actually is, okay? So one of the things I always ask in a consultation is, have you ever worked and not been paid for your work? Sometimes you're a victim of human trafficking if you've been forced to do work and you weren't paid what you were supposed to be paid, if you were threatened by an employer that you couldn't, that you weren't allowed to leave the company, or there's going to be some kind of retaliation. They're victims of human trafficking at massage parlors and in restaurants and agricultural fields across the United States. Okay, this is broader than you think. It might apply to you. This may have happened to you, so it's something that you should talk to an attorney about. There's VAWA is if you've been married to an abusive U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, or your parent or a child was abusive toward their parent. This may be an option to gain permanent residency. There was kind of a scam where there was some group of attorneys, maybe not real attorneys, on TikTok saying, "Hey, I'll get you your green card," and then fraudulently putting information on there about children being abusive towards their parents. Um, so you want to make sure that anything that is filed is true, and you don't want to get involved in anything like that. Okay, false information provided to the government can result in a permanent bar. So if somebody's telling you to say something that's not true on an application, you definitely want to find someone else to talk to and don't work with that attorney or notario or your friend who thought it was a good idea. Not a good idea. Temporary protected status. The government can designate countries for protection. You had to be here by a certain time and meet certain requirements for temporary protected status. This is something that the Trump administration has been ending for country after country. So there are still some countries protected by this, but individuals with temporary protected status tend to be losing that status and having to look at other options right now. All right, so family-based options. This might apply to you. You might be a spouse, a child, parent, or a sibling of someone who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Usually we're looking at spouses when we're talking about students, but not always, okay? It's really important if you're considering getting married to a U.S. citizen in the United States, that you are doing it for the right reasons. Our government wants to see that you're getting married to spend your lives together. Now, there are different cultural reasons for getting married, and as long as you're doing it for the reason that you want to spend your lives together, and not solely for immigration purposes, that's okay. You don't want to be in a situation where you're paying someone to marry you, knowing you're getting divorced in a couple of years. It seems like a good idea to some people at the time, but it ends up causing way more problems. Okay, so if you're going to pursue via this path, just make sure it's a real relationship and a real marriage. Okay, this isn't like get out of jail free card. It's going to get you in more trouble than you think. So there are also like some of these classifications have visas available immediately, and for some of them there's a very long wait. So I showed you that visa bulletin for employment-based visas. There's a visa bulletin for family-based visas as well. If you're not the parent of a U.S. citizen or minor child of a U.S. citizen or the spouse of a U.S. citizen, then there's a limited number of visas available, and you have to see how long you have to wait in order to benefit from a family-based case. Okay? So let's see. So I'm hoping that you walk away from this with lots of ideas, and certainly the idea that you're going to take advantage of everything CU has to offer to you, that you're going to do your research nice and early, that you're going to have a backup plan if your first plan doesn't work out, if your plan is to remain in the United States, that you're going to explore options with an open mind, okay? And get personalized legal advice. All right, it's really important that you get advice about your situation and you don't rely on the advice given to somebody else. And one of the things I didn't have on a slide, but I wanted to note in particular is that, with the Trump administration in office, things are changing constantly, okay? So depending on which country that you're from, for example, we've got a hold right now on adjudication or the government actually reviewing the applications for individuals from certain countries. There's also a travel ban in place so that if you didn't already have a visa in place when that travel ban went into effect, you may not be able to get a visa to travel to the US right now. So it's really important to know what's happening right now. So if you got a consultation 2 years ago with a lawyer, you may need to do that research again. And maybe right before you leave the country, if you're planning on traveling, you want to do that again. Okay. So let's see. I think I have managed to leave a couple minutes for questions. I'm putting up right now just some of the resources. These are legitimate places to get information. Okay, so your CU, Student and Scholar Services, hopefully that's a current link. I think it is. The American Immigration Lawyers Association, you can find a lawyer who is a member of this organization at this link. You want to make sure you're working with someone who specializes in immigration. I can't guarantee that all of the lawyers on here are good lawyers, but I can say if you're working with an immigration lawyer that's not on this list, they aren't tapped into the main resource and funnel of knowledge that diligent immigration lawyers are. So you kind of want to make sure that they're on this list. Okay. And then U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is the benefits branch of immigration. So that's their website. And there is a lot of information there that's good information. All right. So do you have any questions for me?
So there are some questions that were in the chat. I think there were a couple of questions about the specific salary levels for the priority in the lottery for H-1B.
Okay. Um, so I'm not sure what the question was specifically, but in the past years with the lottery, we didn't have to tell the government what type of job the worker would be doing in the United States at this stage, and we didn't have to say what the salary is going to be. And this year we have to pick a classification. So there's federal classifications for jobs. The resource for that is ONET, ONET, I think .org. I think it's called ONET or gov. But you go to ONET, search for ONET, and you can look at different job classifications there. And you're trying to match the job description and the job title with the federal classification. Once you have that federal classification, then you can look at the wages that the government says need to be paid. And there's going to be a level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 wage. Okay, so a level 1 wage is for someone who has, it's like an entry level position. Okay, so the employer would be required to pay at least that if they wanted to do an H-1B as the prevailing wage. But they may be offering more than that. So it might be that $60,000 is a level 1 wage for your type of position. $80,000 is a level 2 wage, 93,000 is level 3, and over 110 is level 4. I just made that up. It's going to depend on the type of position, your location. Okay, so like Denver metro area is going to have higher wages than like a small town in Kansas. So it's kind of based on the prevailing wage in the area and surveys that have been done. So that's what they're looking at. We have to figure out which classification is it from that ONET website. And then also which wage level will the employer be offering. And the wage level for the position is going to determine how many entries you get into the lottery this year. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
And then there's one question. So the next one is, can an employer be the university for H-1B, say you're in research and you're working with faculty members in your department, and is that CAP exempt?
If you're working for the university in a position that requires at least a bachelor's degree, that should be CAP exempt. So, and I mean, universities have different setups. A lot of universities, and I think CU has some attorneys that are in-house, and they may contract out for some other types of positions or some other work depending on what needs to be done. So you need to talk to CU about sponsorship if you have a job there.
Right. So there's a question about, are dentists public, I guess dentists and public healthcare jobs categorized as capped or uncapped?
So most dentists work for private companies, so those are going to be capped subject. If you are working for a nonprofit that, for example, has an agreement with a university to take on dentists in training, then maybe that entity would be cap exempt.
Okay. All right, and so there's a question about what is the difference between E2 and EB2 visa?
Okay, and E2 is a temporary visa. So we're in non-immigrant temporary status world. EB2 is employment-based, second preference. This is an immigrant visa, so you're trying to get your permanent residence. So the E2 is a treaty trader visa, someone who's an entrepreneur, typically, investing in the United States, and there's a treaty with your country, with the country that you're a citizen of. So they're very different things.
Okay, there's one question about if I'm an H-1B applicant, what are the options for a Canadian common law partner? Are there any parameters to prove common law?
So if you want to include a partner, you need to be married to your partner, and common law is not marriage. So you may need to actually get legally married in order to include your partner.
Right. Okay, so what if I already have an H-1B and an I-140 approved? And when I go back to my home country for 2 years and come back, do I need to pay the $100,000 fee?
You want to go home for 2 years. Okay. I think you should speak with an attorney. Since you have an approved H-1B, I would say you may not be subject to it, but it's really going to depend on several things. And that sounds like a specific circumstance in which you'd want to get advice before you do that.
Okay, so this is another one related to the fee. As a Canadian after OPT working on TN visa and finding an H-1B sponsor later, will the $100,000 fee apply there? Like, so switching from TN to H-1B.
So, as far as we know, if you're in the United States in valid TN status and you get an H-1B approved while you're within the United States, you can change your status so you won't be subject to the $100,000 fee. Changing status means you're inside the United States when that H-1B is filed, and you're in valid status at that time.
Right. Um, so the question about how about federal, so I guess this is going back to the dentist question, how about federally qualified dentist jobs?
So just working for the federal government doesn't mean you're cap exempt. So you're going to have to I mean, you have to look at the specific job and the specific employer.
Okay. And I think this will be our last question. So can I apply for EB2 National Interest Waiver under H4 F1? So I guess does their current status matter to filing that application?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a complicated question. You can file an I-140 petition to try to get qualified for a national interest waiver. Um, really, at any time, I would talk to an attorney to make sure that you don't do anything that could compromise the status that you're currently in. Once you get an approved I-140 petition, you look at applying for permanent residency and whether you're able to do that inside the United States as an adjustment of status. So that's within the US, an application for permanent residency, or you have to apply for an immigrant visa outside the United States will depend on your situation at the time that you're eligible for residence. Okay. But I think that type of application, the status that you're currently in, like where you're from, what's going on right now with all of the travel bans and the pauses on adjudication, I think you definitely want to talk to a lawyer before you take any steps toward that I-140 petition.
All right, so I think we're gonna end it there. Thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon to speak with us. It seems like a lot of people had some of their important questions, or at least starting places addressed. One question in the chat. Yes, we are recording it, and hopefully it'll get posted sometime soon. All right, so I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.